You tore my $10,000 stockings? She hissed, her heels striking the floor like a verdict. Yes, ma'am, he replied, eyes steady. But that's nothing compared to what your company took from me. He was just a security guard, until she discovered those very hands once crafted pieces that graced the runways of Paris. Now she's begging him to save her fashion empire. But will he say yes? If you've ever been underestimated but never let go of your true worth, drop a comment saying, I know how that feels, and tell us where you're watching from. The city moved like clockwork that morning, all polished heels and clicking briefcases under a sky the color of silver. Evelyn Mercer stepped out of her luxury town car, her tailored coat cinched at the waist, her signature silk stockings catching the light as she walked toward the entrance of Mercer Atelier's flagship store. The moment felt frozen in grace, until it wasn't. Thomas Hale, stationed nearby in his Navy security uniform, spotted a cyclist barreling toward a group of distracted pedestrians. Without thinking, he lunged forward, catching the handlebars just in time, but his momentum sent him slightly off balance. He bumped into Evelyn's side, and in that blink of a second, her stocking snagged on the gritty edge of a concrete planter. A sharp, unmistakable rip echoed in the silence. She looked down, horrified. Do you have any idea what you've just ruined? She asked, voice like cold steel. These cost more than you make in a month. Thomas stood motionless, jaw tight, but his eyes drifted across the plaza where his daughter Lily stood, clutching her school bag, wide-eyed and watching. She had insisted on walking the last block with him before school, always proud of her dad in uniform. Now shame spread across his face like a bruise. A stranger across the street had filmed the entire incident, drawn by the sudden tension. The footage caught Evelyn's icy glare, Thomas's clenched silence, and Lily's small figure in the background. That evening, the video would explode across social media, a symbol of wealth and power, humiliating humility and duty. But in that very moment, Thomas simply reached for Lily's hand. He didn't speak, he didn't argue. He just walked away, the torn silk left behind like a line dividing two lives, one before and one yet to be stitched. The apartment smelled faintly of soup and old pine cleaner, a modest two-bedroom unit on the edge of the city where Thomas Hale and his daughter Lily tried to build a life out of what was left. That night, after the viral video had made its rounds and whispers began at work, Thomas moved silently through his small kitchen, ladling soup into two mismatched bowls. Lily sat at their scratched dining table, her feet swinging above the floor, carefully sewing a patch onto her school bag, bright blue thread on worn canvas, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Thomas watched her, his chest tight. She reminded him so much of her mother when she was calm and of himself when she was focused. He looked away, toward the shelf above the old radiator. A wooden box sat there locked. Inside it lay his old tools, curved needles, lace hooks, magnifying lenses, spools of thread in shades finer than a language. Once those tools had made his name echo across ateliers in Milan and Lyon. Back then, he wasn't Thomas Hale, invisible man in a uniform. He was Tommaso Halevi, artisan. His stockings were whispered about in designer circles for their delicacy and the way they seemed to float. His hands were praised in features that never showed his face, only the work. Then came the accident. One moment of carelessness with a chemical dye, and his dominant hand trembled for weeks. Clients disappeared. A partner embezzled. The workshop folded. The marriage collapsed under debt and disappointment. And Tommaso became Thomas. He came to America with only Lily in his silence. No one in his building knew who he once was, but Lily knew parts of the story. She'd found old sketches tucked between his books and watched him mend socks like a surgeon. She began to ask questions, not to shame him, but to learn. On Sundays, while other kids played soccer, Lily sat beside her father and learned the difference between chain stitch and cross stitch, how to anchor lace so it moved like breath. She practiced on scraps of old fabric and made tiny things. A doll's dress, a bookmark, a pocket square embroidered with a sunflower. Without telling him, she started selling them to neighbors, each sale going into a jar marked Dad's Workshop. She didn't know what that meant exactly, only that when she whispered it, her father's face softened like a window warming in morning light. That night after dinner, Thomas sat on the couch, Lily asleep against his side, her tiny fingers still curled as if holding a needle. The TV played softly, but he wasn't watching. He stared at his hands, the calloused fingers, the faded burn on his knuckle, the ridged scar on his thumb, and wondered if they still remembered the dance they once knew. In the hallway, a neighbor paused, listening to the hush inside the Hale home, not knowing that in that small room, between the silence and the stitching, a legacy had begun to stir once more. It was nearly 9 p.m. when Evelyn Mercer, exhausted from back-to-back crisis meetings, descended the elevator alone to retrieve a forgotten portfolio. The executive floor was dark, all except for the low security light at the lobby entrance, where the faint rustle of thread caught her attention. She paused, surprised to find a small child sitting cross-legged at the front desk, lit by the soft green glow of a desk lamp. Lily Hale. The little girl looked up and froze, recognizing Evelyn instantly, but not shrinking. "My dad's still working. I stay here if I'm quiet," she said simply, the kind of honest sentence that made Evelyn feel oddly out of place in her own building. Her eyes drifted to what Lily held in her lap, a rectangle of linen, edges neatly hemmed, the center alive with intricate embroidery. Evelyn leaned in. That's beautiful," she said before she could stop herself. Lily beamed. "It's a bookmark. I sell them sometimes. Dad taught me how." Evelyn blinked. The pattern, an interlace of vines and geometric angles, looked disturbingly familiar. But this version had more finesse, a flourish near the border she'd never seen before. "Your dad taught you this?" she asked again, this time quietly. "Yeah, he used to make really pretty things. But now he's busy being a guard. He says someday, when we have a workshop again, we'll make the prettiest stockings in the world." Evelyn stared at her, stunned, but the child had already gone back to her stitching, humming faintly. When Thomas appeared moments later, his face tightened at the sight of Evelyn with Lily. "We're leaving," he said quickly, scooping up his daughter's things. Evelyn nodded, but her gaze caught on a leather notebook Lily had dropped. She bent down and retrieved it, flipping it open out of reflex. What she found inside stopped her cold. Pages of hand-drawn hosiery designs, some clearly from a skilled adult, others embellished by a child's whimsical hand. One featured an ankle pattern that integrated lace into a stylized sunflower, a perfect fusion of Lily's stitch and her father's structure. "Did you draw these?" she asked, her voice lower now, softer. "Dad and I. He draws the hard parts." Evelyn handed the book back slowly, her heart thudding. As they left, she watched the two of them disappear into the elevator. The tall, quiet man with hands that once shaped legacies, and the little girl whose fingers carried the spark of something timeless. The next morning, Evelyn sat in her glass-walled office with that image still etched in her mind. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she quietly ordered a copy of Thomas Hale's personnel file. It was ordinary, too ordinary, a reliable employee, polite, punctual, invisible. But Evelyn had a hunch. She hired a private investigator. "I need to know everything," she said, her voice low. "Start in Europe. Look into lace, into hands, into names he might have stopped using." As she stared out over the city skyline, she whispered almost to herself, "No one teaches a child to stitch like that unless they once stitched magic." 3 days after the encounter with Lily, Evelyn Mercer waited in the lobby at 7:58 a.m., standing by the marble reception desk in heels that rarely touched common floors. Thomas Hale entered through the security doors with his usual quiet stride, his expression unreadable until he saw her. He froze. Evelyn didn't waste time. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice steady, "I'd like to speak with you in my office." Eyes followed them, curious and suspicious. The last time anyone saw the CEO interact with Thomas, it had ended in public humiliation. Now they walked side by side into the executive elevator like unlikely allies, silence hanging between them. Once inside her office, Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have much choice," Thomas replied, still standing. "If this is about the incident, I understand if you want me reassigned." Evelyn shook her head. "It's not about the stockings." She opened a sleek folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were 3 items: sketches from Lily's notebook, a high-resolution image of Valoria's declining sales chart, and a photograph, black and white, grainy, of a pair of hands delicately manipulating lace. That photograph, she said softly, is from a 2009 article in L'Artisan Moderne. It praised an unnamed craftsman for a new lace tensioning technique. I know those hands now. They're yours. Thomas stared at the folder, jaw clenched, then closed it. That man no longer exists. Because you walked away? Or because no one gave you a reason to return? Evelyn asked. He met her eyes. No fear, just fatigue. What do you want? A collaboration, she said. We need to salvage our Crossroads collection. I've reviewed the existing designs. They lack soul. They mimic tradition, but forget purpose. Your technique, what I saw in Lily's work, could restore authenticity. I'm not a designer anymore, he said flatly. I'm a single dad who clocks in and out. She leaned forward. And I'm a CEO who once sewed till my fingers bled. We both gave up something, but maybe we don't have to stay gone. He laughed quietly, bitter. You insulted me in front of my daughter. You saw a ruined stocking, not a man. Evelyn didn't flinch. You're right, I did. But I also saw something else the other night. Something I hadn't seen in years. Craft, grace, legacy. She stood and opened a wall cabinet, pulling out a pair of prototype stockings from the current line. Look at these, you'll see it immediately. Despite himself, Thomas stepped closer. His hands, reluctant but practiced, examined the seam, the gusset, the tension at the ankle. Too tight here. Uneven stretch, he muttered, almost to himself. Evelyn smiled gently. Exactly. You still see what others miss. And Lily deserves to see you do what you were born to do. That night, Thomas sat at the kitchen table under a flickering bulb, his old toolkit open like an altar. Lily peeked in. Are you making something? He nodded slowly. We're going to try just one piece. And so, with trembling fingers that hadn't forgotten, Thomas began to sew, stitch by careful stitch, a path back to who he once was. The studio Mercer Atelier provided was all sleek surfaces and hushed tones, walls too white, lights too bright, a sterile kind of modernity that felt nothing like the dusty, sun-warmed workshop Thomas had once built with his bare hands in Lyon. Still, he unpacked his tools, one by one, each wrapped in a strip of cloth, worn and patient like old friends, and placed them on the wide workbench as if laying out memories. Whispers followed him in the corridors. The security guy? Is this a publicity stunt? Does he even have credentials? But Thomas said nothing. He let his stitches answer for him. Each day he came early and left late, quietly setting up his space, methodically drafting patterns by hand, letting his fingers remember the rhythm. At home, Lily watched him in awe. For the first time in years, he looked alive. Not just breathing, but living. She sketched beside him each evening, their pages overlapping in quiet dialogue. On the third week, Evelyn Mercer visited the studio. She stood by the doorway at first, arms crossed like armor. But as she watched Thomas coax lace from air, she stepped closer. That curve, she noted, pointing. Too subtle. Thomas arched an eyebrow. You sound like a designer again. She hesitated, then smiled. Maybe I miss being one. That was the beginning. Evelyn started stopping by more often. At first, she gave brief critiques. Then she pulled up a stool. Eventually, she rolled up her sleeves, inked her fingers, and joined him at the table. These stitches, she said one night, they're like sentences. I used to write in thread. Thomas nodded. Design is a language. If we listen closely, it speaks. One evening, Lily showed them a sketch of a stocking with a tiny, deliberate asymmetry, one stitch out of place, not by mistake, but by intent. Why the flaw? Evelyn asked. Because perfect things are boring, Lily answered matter-of-factly. The surprise makes it real. Thomas looked at Evelyn. She's right. There's an old tradition, imperfection is signature, like the Navajo weaving a mistake into every rug to let the spirit move through. Or wabi-sabi. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Everything here has been about perfection, consistency, control. She looked down at the small sketch. Maybe that's why it all feels empty now. And from that moment, the concept for the new line took root. They called it the Crossroads Collection, a meeting of past and future, of machine and hand, of flaw and form. Each piece would bear a small deviation, intentional and unique, a thread out of place, a bend where none was expected, a fingerprint of humanity. As the studio came to life, younger designers started to drift in, curious. They watched Thomas work, some in silence, others with tentative questions. He welcomed them, taught them, not with bravado, but with patience. He spoke of weight, of tension, of listening to the fabric instead of forcing it. Slowly something shifted, not just in the pieces, but in the people. And in Evelyn Mercer too, who found herself shedding not just her heels, but her walls. In that space of quiet threads and unexpected turns, something was being repaired. Not just stockings, but people. As the Crossroads collection moved from sketches to fabric, frictions stirred beneath the polished surfaces of Mercer Atelier. Some departments delayed requests from the studio, deliveries were mysteriously rerouted, training sessions Thomas had scheduled for junior artisans were abruptly canceled. Evelyn suspected sabotage but said nothing, yet. Then came the meeting. Calvin Brooks, chief operating officer, and her longest-standing lieutenant, walked into her office with a practiced calm and eyes like a scalpel. "You've invested a great deal of company resources into a former security guard," he said without preamble. Evelyn remained seated, measured. "I've invested in a master artisan, with no formal credentials, with a daughter running around the design floor. It's unprofessional. You're losing objectivity." Evelyn stood, quiet fury rising behind her ribs. "I remember a time when passion outweighed credentials. You used to believe that too." Calvin's voice hardened. "The board has noticed your distraction. They're concerned. If you don't step back, I'll be forced to call a vote of confidence." That night, Evelyn didn't go home. She returned to the studio instead, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. Thomas looked up from his work table, surprised. "Didn't think I'd see you tonight." She said nothing, just sat down and picked up a spool of thread. "Then let's get this right." For 3 days, she didn't leave. She worked beside Thomas and Lily, who brought her cocoa and unspoken forgiveness. They redesigned elements of the collection by hand. They reworked stitching diagrams to simplify training. Evelyn's perfectly manicured hands turned raw, stained by dye and effort. But her eyes, those once glassy, calculated eyes, grew softer with each passing hour. She laughed, she cursed at tangled thread. She sang softly to Lily while drafting borders. Slowly, the studio transformed into a sanctuary, not of luxury, but of labor, of shared fire. One night, as they reviewed samples, Evelyn noticed a tiny flaw in Lily's newest sketch, a swirl slightly off-center. "You left it on purpose again, didn't you?" she asked. Lily grinned. "Yep, it's our secret," Thomas explained gently. "It's an old philosophy. Wabi-sabi, beauty and imperfection. A reminder that we're human and our hands matter." Evelyn stared at the sketch, the soft asymmetry tugging at something long dormant in her. She rose and walked to her office, returning with a dusty portfolio, her designs from when she was 22, before the boardroom, before the awards, before she learned to hide her fire. She opened the pages, revealing wild, imperfect lines, strange shapes, and emotion etched in ink. "I forgot these existed," she whispered. Thomas glanced at her. "You didn't forget, you just stopped looking." That night, long after the others had left, Evelyn sat alone in the quiet studio, turning the idea over in her mind. What if they didn't just tolerate imperfection? What if they celebrated it? What if every piece in the Crossroads collection bore its own fingerprint, its own whisper of rebellion? The next morning, she called an emergency meeting. "We're changing the narrative," she announced. "No more hiding the hand behind the stitch. From now on, we lead with it." And with that, Mercer Atelier stopped being a brand and began becoming a movement. The day of the Crossroads launch arrived, not with blinding lights and robotic poses, but with soft music and the scent of fresh fabric in the air. The venue had been transformed into a living workshop, wooden tables lined with spools of thread, artisan stations scattered among the runway. As guests entered, they didn't just watch, they witnessed. Every model passed through a hands-on moment, a final stitch added, a tiny flourish sewn live before stepping forward. And then came the finale. The lights dimmed. A soft spotlight opened at the head of the runway. Thomas Hale stepped out, Not in a tuxedo, but in his old apron, linen shirt rolled at the cuffs. Holding his hand was Lily, white dress, stockings embroidered with the same imperfect swirl from her sketchbook. Together they walked slowly to the end. The room held its breath. There, Evelyn Mercer joined them. Lily handed her a box. Inside, a pair of tiny gloves she had stitched herself. Inside the cuff, Evelyn read the words, "Thank you for seeing us." A hush rippled across the room, followed by something rare in fashion, tears. A year later, Mercer Atelier opened the Lily Hale Studio for creative renewal. Artisans displaced by automation arrived in droves, their hands hungry for thread again. Workshops were held not in silence, but in song, in story, in laughter. Evelyn walked those halls daily now, not as an ice queen, but as a mentor. And Thomas, he taught again. Not just lacework, but patience, precision, presence. When an old Italian artisan named Maestro Valentini arrived and studied Thomas's work, he whispered, "You've carried the old ways forward, but you've added something new, something alive." That night, Evelyn watched as Thomas and Lily worked side by side in the studio, the hands of a father who had lost everything but never quit, and the hands of a daughter who never stopped believing in him. "Your father," Evelyn said softly to Lily, "is a very wise man." Lily smiled. "He says the best designs don't just change how we look, they change how we feel." And in the quiet hum of the workshop, it was clear. Some tears don't break us. They open us. They let the light in. If you've ever believed that something broken could become something beautiful, share this story. Where are you watching from? Let us know below. And never forget, sometimes the most powerful designs begin with a single stitch.